So in 2003, I was either 13 or 14. And that was around the time that the band t.A.T.u started becoming popular. It was in 2003. And I can't remember specifically when in 2003, but I'm pretty sure it was sometime around like late winter, early spring. And I remember because this was around the time I was turning 14, and my birthday is in May. So, but I do distinctly remember hanging out at not my cousin's house, but a friend of my cousin's house, and it was a bunch of girls, and one of them was given a, uh, a album of t.A.T.u, and it was their first big one that had like all their big hits on it, like "Not Gonna Get Us" and all that stuff, and I think me and all the rest of these girls who were, I think, a couple years older than me, um, like we must have listened to that album like 3 or 4 times that night. so so I definitely like, yeah, like t.A.T.u. It's definitely like a pretty inherent part of my memory. Just that specific album. Not only because like the sound was a lot more, I guess, aggressive, and a lot of folks I knew like weren't really used to like aggressive types of bands like that when it came to like female duo bands, but also the fact that there was sort of this theme of queerness in it made it really fascinating and interesting, and it was before I started to kind of realize that I was attracted to males rather than females. And so so for me, the whole idea of same-sex attraction, what, like, at that time there wasn't really a word for it from my perspective. Like, I'd heard the word gay before, but I didn't really know that it meant anything more than just like an insult at the time, and it wasn't until like my cousin, who has since transitioned, since that time, uh they were the ones who pretty much explained to me what gay actually meant and all that stuff. So when that band became popular and big, and I started, getting into that kind of like, I guess, culture and stuff, it kind of opened a little bit of a pathway for me to be able to come out and be accepting of myself too. So the band t.A.T.u means a lot to me, and because of that. And so as a result, I have kind of explored a lot of their history as time has gone on. And I am aware, that over time things have changed. And I recognize now that at the time that was really more of like a performative thing. But when I was a kid, though, 13, 14, like, I didn't care if it was a performance or not. Like, the fact to me was it was two girls like actually kissing. And like, that was real enough. That made it real enough. I am aware that one of the two members, I'm not going to say the band, but one of the two members of the band, has since kind of come out and sort of expressed sort of, not regret, but like, she's openly kind of stated that she doesn't really approve of male same-sex attraction. And I understand that there are like nationalistic reasons for people to say and do stuff like that, and it doesn't really matter what she believes or what she doesn't believe to me, because the band for me I'm always going to have those memories and feelings attached to them. But I've watched the documentary Anatomy of Tattoo a few times. At one point I could only find an edited, like, censored version of it, way back in the day. But nowadays, it's like I think you could pretty much watch the full version, like, even on YouTube, like, if you looked it up. Um, anyway, suffice to say, I've watched that documentary several times, and I feel like it kind of, it depicts the record industry and the music production industry in a pretty dark light overall. Certainly, uh, not a glorification at all of the folks who financed their talent and all that. Like I would say it's a pretty dark portrait of what it means to be a music artist, um, especially a young music artist. But I will say though, there are some political aspects of that whole sort of series of events that happened at the time when their popularity in the West kind of blew up, that I do think is interesting to think about in hindsight. Like the fact that they were pretty openly like opposed to the uh, the Iraqi conflict and things like that. Like there were definitely things at the time that I remember like being kind of like, that's interesting timing. That was during the Bush years, and I know that not everybody was for the war or anything like that, but a lot of people seemed to be at the time, though. That's what it felt like. And so, um, little things like that. I mean, I can't help but notice and sort of absorb as time goes on. Um, and yeah. I mean, also, the that was after like the World Trade Center incident and all that. And so then, like, fast forward to now, and I've seen this movie now, Vox Lux, with Natalie Portman, and I think there's actually a number of really fascinating parallels I could draw here between that and my memories of the 2000s and sort of culturally what things meant at that time. Because I remember in 1999, like after the Colorado shooting, um, that there were definitely like reverberations. And this movie, Vox Lux, actually does acknowledge certain things kind of that were happening at that time throughout the course of this kind of picture. And the thing about Vox Lux, though, is it kind of is almost like Persona in a way, in the sense that it's a movie that's divided in half, and both halves are very different from each other and don't really jive very well together, but at the same time are rather fascinating in their own respective ways. I feel like the second half is the aspect of the film that brought me some flashbacks, honestly, to Anatomy of Tattoo. Like there were certain things about how Natalie Portman's character ends up kind of using her circumstances as a performance, like her meltdowns as a performance, and how the circumstances that brought her stardom end up kind of being what represent her as an artist. So it's almost like because of that, her work will always sort of be tied to violence, and it's almost like she has to sort of carry that torch. Um, which of course the movie does actually kind of provide a little bit of an answer for in the final minutes, and that kind of changes a lot of things that happen in the first half of the film. I would say the biggest difference, though, between Anatomy of Tattoo and Vox Lux is that Vox Lux comes from the perspective of a survivor. The film does do a good job of actually untangling the whole like victim narrative by um, kind of showing the events of what happened to her before she becomes a pop star, and it shows those details in some pretty like in explicit ways that um a lot of the details don't seem to really make a whole lot of sense when you're watching it, but then when you're kind of thinking back on the film and thinking back on little elements and details, like the fact that she goes blind in one eye, and the fact that there is that like the World Trade Center attacks end up kind of being a part of the trajectory of her career. Um, and of course, the fact that there is like the duo two female duo element with her and her sister. Although in eventually she goes solo. Um, but yeah, it's an interesting film. The second half of the film is more violent and volatile than the first half, in some ways, actually. Um, but because the film is following a school shooting survivor, you have to there's a little bit more baggage to the whole sort of presentation, and so that baggage isn't really present in the documentary about T.A.T.u, Anatomy of T.A.T.u, but it does. But I do kind of feel like both films kind of ask similar questions. I guess I don't know, like something about I don't even maybe I think maybe both films are trying to sort of figure out who's really profiting and who's really benefiting when it's a young girl who ends up having to sort of carry like the jangled nerves of her nation or their nations on their shoulders, I mean, with T.A.T.u, you have kind of the post-Soviet cultural whiplash thing going on. But Vox Lux, it ends up being less about a cultural shift and more about how, because her career began with tragedy, it gives her sort of a free rein to more or less represent whatever she wants. And that's why her career will never really escape that shadow of violence. It's a sad story, but there's definitely truth in that idea for sure. And I look at the way like a lot of young female artists come up these days, and there are definitely things that like I would say haven't changed. But then I think what bothers me more is how I guess how more obvious and how more shameless those sort of things have become now. And also how today we're more willing to kind of forget that whenever something more outrageous or more tragic captures our attention.